So I wanted to talk a bit about Metaphor Refantazio, and after playing the demo, I can pretty definitively stamp this game with the fantasy persona label. While they've clearly put an effort into pushing away from that label a bit, the fact of the matter is that this is the same leadership, and almost certainly a ton of the same people that made Persona 5. And that's not a bad thing. Persona 5 was an incredible JRPG, and that made me excited to play it all the way through, even though that game was like 100 hours, which is not an easy feat. But it isn't just fantasy Persona. It takes everything that they've learned up to this point, throws in fantasy elements, and dips it in creativity. The designs of everything that you see just oozes with it, from the world, the monsters, or humans as they're called, to the UI. That isn't always for the best. The game can get a bit busy at times with all the different things that are in motion, and that includes in the UI. They might have gone a little bit too far in making everything incredibly stylish in some ways, just because there's so many moving parts that aren't really that necessary. But it isn't enough to significantly detract from the clear quality of the game. From the first moments that you start it up, you can tell that there's a lot of love in this game, a lot of production went into making this game. They've basically thrown an entire anime into the game, which is pretty incredible to see. For me, this makes the cutscenes a lot better, just because I get to kick back, watch some fantasy anime. Pretty great. It also has a really solid premise, and I know that for some people they might think that it's not particularly new and creative, but I don't need the premise to be that. Give me a solid premise, and after that we can get into creativity. Basically, the king has been murdered, and this started this world's version of Succession, and our character has been thrust directly into the center of that. It seems that we at least start by trying to help out the prince of the kingdom, though whether that's where we end up is hard to tell. Maybe we'll become the king. That's where I would go with it, but we'll see. There could be some twists and turns. It definitely feels like a classic fantasy story with political machinations, evil plots, magic, and all sorts of twists and turns. Even dragons, which is exactly the kind of thing that I love. So if you're a fantasy buff that hasn't necessarily jumped into any JRPGs yet, then this is definitely the stepping stone that you need. One area it steps a decent amount away from the Persona formula is in world traversal. There will be a lot more areas to go through, with various cities, towns, and dungeons, and that way I think Metaphor feels a lot more like other fantasy RPGs, and those areas can be actually quite large and expansive. If you take a look at any of the Persona games, there were pretty small and closed in terms of the areas that you actually move through, especially if you're thinking about, the different dungeons. But in Metaphor, there are open outdoor areas. Don't expect it to be anything like an open world game. It's just a lot more open than we've come to expect from this developer. That's in terms of just width of the area. The combat is very easy to step into, especially for anyone that has previously played a Persona game. It's very similar to all of those games, with some new additions. And in this case, it's definitely if it's not broke, don't fix it sort of situation. The Persona combat formula is a lot of fun. It's quick-paced, and it's pretty addicting. And adding the fantasy paint job hasn't changed that, so there's something here for Persona fans, there's something here for fantasy fans and JRPG fans. Get directly into the middle of something that is clearly going to be pretty great. It does have a bit of performance issues, and that is something they've managed to fix a little bit, but when I was playing it, it wasn't perfect yet, at least in the demo. They stated that they're aware of the issues publicly, and they're working to fix them, so it seems pretty likely that this will get taken care of over time, maybe even by the time that Metaphor releases. But some of those issues are things that they probably won't fix, like there just aren't that many options for the PC version. If you look into any of the settings, there's barely any options at all, and that's a pretty big issue. It doesn't have any sort of DLSS, it doesn't have FSR, it doesn't have any of this stuff, frame generation, that we've come to expect. So that's an issue. Newer games kind of on PC need to have that stuff because PC people, and that includes me, we really care about 60 FPS. So anything that gets us to that point, we're going to want. And this game doesn't have that. There are some things that could be a good or a bad thing depending on who you are. It does have a time system. Things happen over time that will almost certainly lock you out of being able to do or take certain actions. From the sounds of it, this system is pretty decently lenient, and it's been that way in the past in Persona games, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. But with a system like that, there's always the possibility that they don't quite balance it correctly at some point during the game, or that it just doesn't match your personal preferences. For some people, the idea that there is a time system at all makes them not want to play the game. For me personally, I'm not too bothered by it. I have a decent amount of confidence that they'll do enough to set it up in a way that it won't be detrimental to the experience. But you will have to keep this in mind while you're traveling and running through dungeons, as different actions that you take will cause the time to progress forward. This is a game that I've been pretty excited about all along, but that I was a bit hesitant about as well, and some of that was because of the time system. With trying something new, there is always the possibility that a new IP is a flop, or that something nonsensical gets added to ruin the experience. Just take a look at what happened with BioWare and Bethesda. I still even love their games, but you can't deny that they made some pretty glaring errors in judgment. They had great formulas for the games that they used to do, and then they went in a weird direction where large amounts of their fan bases have now pretty much completely turned on them. After playing this demo, I'm happy to report that most of those worries are gone. This is clearly going to be a great game for me, I can already tell, and one that I'm definitely looking forward to playing through. The only thing that I'm a little worried about are those performance issues. I'm the kind of person that can get pretty frustrated when I'm looking at a beautiful world and I start getting stutters and low frame rates and all this stuff. But that was only a thing that happened for me at the very beginning of the demo, just at the very start, the first section, and even then it wasn't too bad. After leaving the first area, all those stutters went away. So overall, after playing a bit of the demo and putting it away, I'm definitely considering Metaphor Refantazio a day one purchase, which will only change if it gets completely blasted in reviews. So what about you? Are you looking forward to Metaphor? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.